On Energy Timelines, we bring intelligent conversations and interesting personalities discussing critical issues that shape the industry, even the economy of Nigeria. Join us every weekday on EnergyDay TV. Welcome to Energy Timelines on EnergyDay TV. My name is Monique Agbe. Today on the program, we will be showing you snippets from the PWC Roundtable discussions on issues on the power sector in Nigeria. Do enjoy.
Special advisor to the president has said on infrastructure. I think it's very encouraging what we've heard today about the steps that the government is taking, some of which we know, some of which we're just hearing. They're focusing on gas, they're focusing on renewables, they're focusing on infrastructure, policy for pricing and tariffs. So I hope that all of these things are going to materialize, and it's definitely an encouragement for us in the development and investment sphere. And we're encouraged, and we also want to see how it's going to play out. But we are encouraged, and we continue to watch it.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am.
It's known that global race to net zero is a challenge to Africa. So what's the way forward for African countries generally?
Okay, so the net zero race is on, but we believe as PWC that Africa needs to have a distinct path to net zero. We cannot achieve the target set by the rest of the world for 2050. As you recall, India, for example, is targeting 2060 or thereabout, and I think China is 10 years after India. And if you look at the total emission from the rest of the world, Africa is just contributing 3 to 4% of the global emissions. So really, and we don't have the resources, the financial resources, the technical resources at the moment to transition to the 2050 deadline. So that would be a near impossible task for Africa to achieve for 2050.
Okay, in view of this 15.2 proven foresight for that Africa have, so if Africa finally transitions, what's the challenge?
Okay, so what we believe is at PWC is that Africa needs to use the resources it currently has to transition. What we mean by that is we need to be allowed by the rest of the world to continue to produce our fossil fuel and then use the financing from fossil fuel to transition gradually to the net zero target. You understand what I mean? So don't stop the sale of fossil fuel, continue to sell your fossil fuel and use the money from that to transition as a gradual process. So as against stop the sale immediately, because what do you fall back? That'll be a disaster.
Okay, finally from my own end, we've seen the special advisor to the president said the government has spent over $2.3 billion in the industry. So how would this all frameworks?
So the power sector is a very capital-intensive sector, from the power production to transmission to distribution. A lot of money is required, and if you look at the current what we call power or energy poverty in Nigeria, the number of people who have access, you need a lot of money to be pumped into that sector to achieve the target that you require. So no matter the numbers you're hearing, I think there's still much more to be done for us all to have the 24/7 power that we all want. Thank you.
PWC Roundtable has been decisive, and we're learning much. What do you think is the takeaway from this conversation?
The takeaway from the conversation is that we need to continue to talk, and we need to continue to put to practice things that we have agreed to do. What I mean by that is that there are not going to be a quick fix to this problem. Don't forget, you have a growing population. The demand is growing. The current supply is not adequate. So there has to be continuous investment in this sector and continuous improvement of what we currently have. We shouldn't throw away what we have now because, no, and please don't let any politician tell you that everything will be fixed in one day. It's not going to be fixed in one day. I think that's one takeaway issue. That it will take some time for it to be done.
So,
all right, I want
what
to
are the
take
measures put in place by the government to ensure sustainability of power?
What are the measures? Like that the special advisor to the president said, you see that several things they are doing, from the mass metering process, from the contract with Siemens in order to ensure that it's more power generated, from investing in transmission. There are a lot of things they are doing, but what I'm saying is all of that will not happen in one night. It will take a lot of process, but there has to be a continuous work. You don't stop saying, oh, we've done it and go back and sleep. you must continue to build more power plants, continue to invest in transmission, continue to invest in distribution, continue to invest in customer awareness, continue to show that you and I are paying the bills, the good bills or the appropriate bills that we get. So if you get a bill and refuse to pay, don't forget that you are now hurting the whole value chain, because once you don't pay, the distribution company don't have money to pay the transmission company. The transmission company don't have money to pay the production company. Then we all suffer.
So there is this conversation around the takeoff of the cost-reflective
Tariff,
tariff
yeah.
by December and
Yes.
into next year. Number one, the first question is, going into an election year,
Yes.
do you think this government really has that will to really?
So I think we should stop mixing election with economics. We always do that, and then because of election, we won't do what we're supposed to do. Okay? So I would say if the government is actually going to do a cost reflective in an election year, that requires a lot of boldness. It means you know what you are doing is right. And number two, sir, a lot of Nigerians are actually paying a cost reflective tariff, because I'm sure you have a generator at home. I have a generator at home. To go and buy that generator, you buy diesel, which is not regulated, or you buy petrol, which is a bit of a subsidy. So you're actually doing that already. So, but if you look at that, what would I rather have? Would I rather be in darkness, or I pay a little bit more and have regular light? I think I pay a little bit more and have regular light than be in darkness.
Okay, sir, a quick one, sir. In terms of funding,
Yes.
what are the options for mini grid operators?
So mini grid operators, they can use their equity funds, their own personal funds, or they can take loans from banks or other finance houses, financial institutions that are ready to support them. There are institutions across the world that are able to support you, particularly if the economics is right. If the economics is right, you can see where the cash flow will come from. There are people who are willing to finance. The issue is, tell us or tell the funders where the money will come from. You know, don't forget, money is very, very what's the word? It goes wherever the returns are good. If the returns are good, the money will come.
All right, a quick one too. Based on this, what's your outlook for Nigeria's power sector in 2022?
I'm not a prophet, so I'm not.
Like, what's your prediction?
My prediction is that we are going to get better. Okay, how much better I don't know, but I think if all of the things that the government is doing and the private sector is doing, if all of that come to fruition, then you see an improvement in the supply and the distribution of power in Nigeria.
Can we quickly reinforce investors' confidence amidst policy inconsistency of the government?
Yes.
In reality, you need to agree with it.
Yeah.
Do you think moving forward, investors can now get funds wherever they can come into and really?
So listen to Mr. Zachary earlier on. If the government have broken up various sectors and make it attractive, and they put on the contract in place for private investors to play, private investors will come in. They will do their risk analysis, and they will factor that risk into their pricing. Okay, and of course we already know that for the mini grid and the special power, people are already doing that and making money. So I think the investors they will take their risk, they weigh their options, and then when they think that the risk is worth it, they will take the risk.
But let's look at the Siemens
Project.
How far? Siemens, I listened to the conversation of the chancellor, the former chancellor of Germany.
Yes.
And she was like talking about government's percentage of local content. So don't you think that is a distraction for that project?
Okay, I think the Siemens project is ongoing. I know one or two persons who are involved in that project, but for such a large-scale project, you will assume there will be some delays. There will be some drawbacks. There will be government trying to ensure that they get the best. Of course, the Germans also want to get the best for themselves. So there'll be a bit of politics mixed with it. But I think it's something that both the Nigerian government and the German government are committed to executing. There might be some hiccups, but I think we're going to see light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay, last one, sir. Are there any low-hanging fruits Nigeria can explore to fit its power challenges?
I think the low-hanging fruit will be the mini grids. Those will be low-hanging fruit. They will come a bit more pricey at the initial stage, but I think in terms of you getting regular power in your estate or your locality, that will be that. We also should exploit the rural electricity project. And you'll be surprised, sir, that the guys in the villages who don't have legacy issues with NEPA are paying higher than you are paying. Yeah, there are some projects that are actually going up in another part of the country right now where you actually have solar powers, and those guys are paying what you call premium, and they're happy to pay because they don't have history of having or it being subsidized before. They just want power. I regulate when I have power. I have it from this time to this time, and I pay for it, and I'm happy with it.
Unlocking liquidity from consumers of power to actually pay for it. And someone did mention important facts. So we say that about 4 million 4 million megawatts are being distributed, right? but they're only collecting cash for about 1.6 million. So that means, and then you're saying you have capacity to generate about 12.5 million. So, I mean, just 1.6 million servicing all of that, it's a huge shortfall. So if the collection issues can be addressed, along with other infrastructural issues and all of that, I think the sector will be better off for it.
You actually use if. Do you think there's hope, considering the present situation around the whole value chain? Disco's expectation on them to really invest, apathy and poor orientation from the part of consumers, and government inconsistent policies. Now, I really don't see hope around this. And you also talked about, yes, there's going to be improvement. How long will it take? Between 2013 and 2021, it's such a long time.
Yeah.
Privatization will really not sing again. It's just like we're still stopped at that point. So moving forward, do you think cost-reflective tariff will solve it? And what's the hope within the short?
I mean, so there's hope. I haven't been at this session and now moderated this one. The messaging is consistent. And even the policies of the government towards the power sector, I think they are consistent, right? Are we seeing the benefit yet? Maybe not as much. But when you think about things around the metering plan, you know, the rollout of meters, those things are there to unlock the value in the system, and it will happen over time. It's just that it's taking a considerable amount of time, but I think they are taking the right steps, you know.
I'm also excited in the fact that the transition to
Renewable
is giving a lot of opportunities for private players really coming.
Yeah.
So in terms of trying to size the kind of investment opportunities, can you just help, like with that conversation that we have, what's the capacity, what's the hope that if investors want to come in and take advantage of available funds, yes, within the shortest period of time we can begin to
get their payback. So that, I mean, that was an interesting part of the conversation, and I hold on to something Doyin said. She says, for those projects to be bankable, for those projects to make sense, they need to be able to control every part of it. So they need to be able to control the transmission, they need to be able to control the distribution, they need to be able to collect the funds by themselves. So it's really about structuring, it's about creative financing or creative projects development of those projects, if I may use that makes it possible for the players in the industry to be able to control the various aspects of the chain, to be able to get their money back. And you see that really with some of the captive projects out there. You see that as well, and it was quite interesting what Mr. Zachary said as well in terms of some of the initiatives that they are taking and that they want to roll out to the private sector. I think once those projects can be self-sustaining, then we'll have more of those projects and there will be larger coverage or larger access to power for Nigerians.
So finally, what's the hope in 2022, next year, coming into this year, what's the hope? Are we going to see improvement in distribution network?
From the conversations that we had today, next year may be too early, considering the fact that those investments need to happen, those regulations need to take effect. Next year may be too early, but they are taking steps in the right direction.
So as a partner in PWC?
Not a partner. I'm a director. Yes.
In banking on your adversary role to the federal government.
Yes.
What area do you think government needs to do more of?
Once again, I'll repeat, I think they are doing the right things. It's really about regulations. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of financing of the sector going on. We don't think it's sustainable, and everyone has said the same thing. I mean, it is not sustainable. But in terms of creating the right environment for those investments to happen, I think they're taking the right steps, and it's mainly the steps I see are mainly metering, and then getting the infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure improved. Yeah.
I think they need to do more on communication.
Yes, certainly, and they did acknowledge that as well. Yeah, they did acknowledge that there's more to be done in even making potential investors aware of the initiatives that they are making. Yeah.
My name is Abimbola Banjo. I'm a partner with the management consulting practice, but I also look after the finance advisory practice for PWC in Western Africa. And I've had the privilege of initiating this event and running it together with my colleagues for the last 12 years.
So how would you assess this initiative so far? And in terms of progress, where do you think we are?
Yeah, so in terms of the power sector roundtable that we've been running for the last 12 years, I think we've made significant progress. I'll be honest with you. I think if you notice, a lot of the conversation we had today were things that were topical issues, right? And a lot of the focus was around sustainability of power today. We've had issues in the past events. We've talked about funding, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about tariff, we've talked about efficiency. And the truth is that every time we have these events, we always come up with some sort of material, thought leadership, where we articulate the conversation and then we come up with our point of view, right? Usually what happens is that point of view is circulated among industry players, right? And becomes the basis for ongoing conversations going forward, right? So if you notice, when we discussed sustainability today, ideas came from the government officials by way of Ahmad Zakari, who is the special advisor to the president on infrastructure. You heard from the MD of NBET himself. You heard from Mr. A.B. Clark, the gentleman that supports the CBN governor in terms of energy strategy and policy. You heard from two of the private sector players, one from Central Electric and Utilities Limited, Ms. Doyin Fadipe. You heard from Joseph Esenwa, who's the CFO of Eco Electric. The MD is, I understand, is unavoidably upset. But the point is, you have key players, and of course ourselves. We've been, midwifing this project and this event for a long time. And the way we see it is that we see ourselves as being in a vantage position to be able to bring the players together, to have conversations that matter, conversations that are relevant in solving key industry issues, whether it be financial sustainability, whether it's environmental sustainability, whether it's how coordination in the industry, whether it's response to having our own clear strategy and policy around how we manage the future of energy.
Now, moving forward, so far, I want you to measure in actual time progress so far. Do you think the conversation is really yielding?
Oh, if progress, we've made huge progress. You see, let's not get distracted by what people on the street say. Oh, I don't have power in my house. There are people who have had significant uplift in power. There are people who didn't have power before who have now been brought into the grid, into the circle of people who have more power available to them. So there's a lot going on. In the conference today, I'm sure you heard when where the stats were reeled out. We started these markets with a deficit of about 28 naira between what the tariffs you could do with the tariffs and what the market actually was calling. So, but now we're saying that the actual tariff, right, and the reality, it only has a six naira deficit, right? So we're saying, and we're looking at bridging that gap that could never, that was something that was very difficult to fathom a while back, right? Because we always had a story where we always had the conversation around the inaffordability of power, you know, the impact on the common man. But somehow it's happening because now you have private sector players. And I can't even imagine a world or a Nigerian power sector where you still have the government still running the business. There's so much going on. There's efficiency. I've had my meter changed like once or twice, and the meter rollout has been incredible. All over the country, there's been mass meter rollouts. And what does that mean? That means that when you get a bill, there are fewer questions asked, right? Because you can always raise the question around whether there's integrity with the meter. But of course, the government has also put in place measures to ensure that meters have the right integrity. There's a company called NEMSA it's a government agency that looks at the integrity of meters. So to some extent, you can rely on the readings coming from those meters. And it gives you some confidence that when you are paying for a bill, that bill reflects what you're actually using. It gives a lot of comfort. It helps you with, you know, knowing that when you're making payments for electricity, you're not being shafted in any, which is a big concern for a lot of Nigerians. That when I'm paying for power, am I paying what is a fair share of my usage? So those are some of the things. There's so many things that have moved forward. You know, so I like us to see it from a positive standpoint. A lot of initiatives that the government is doing, collaborations that are looking into rural electrification. Right now, Nigeria has about 40% of its people without access, right? There's a lot of steps being taken. You also heard when the government representative was saying that they've even increased the subsidy for providing off-grid solutions, off-grid solar home systems from $350 to about $600, right? So I mean, that gives you a sense of the sort of progress that since we made.
All right, you will agree with me that COVID-19 and COVID-19 really shaped a lot of things. And I'm very sure you did not anticipate this, that you were going to be talking so much about energy transition.
Yeah.
What role has energy transition missed the pandemic really played in trying to address the issue of power, people, issues around the power sector?
No, I mean, I'll tell you something. In terms of the relationship between the pandemic and energy transitioning, you may not be able to establish that direct relationship, but energy transition was always coming, right? I think maybe the only link you can draw is that with failing economies, right, and stress on the economy because of lack of productivity arising from the pandemic, people have to look inwards in terms of how do I secure my energy source? Can I still afford to pay for power at this price? What can I do to give myself the leverage, competitive leverage as against this other territory or this other space? So but if the pandemic didn't happen, sooner or later somebody would have said, hang on, this is my advantage, this is theirs, how do I position myself to have the advantage? And that's exactly what we should do as a country, right? And so the point here is, energy transition is a big conversation. You heard we only scratch the surface. COP26 was an event that just happened. It embodied some of the conversations around energy transitioning, right? But again, the view around energy transitioning, I think it needs to be looked at very carefully, right? There's a strategic element for Africa. It's an Africa conversation, right? What does Africa need to do to ensure that it doesn't get left behind in this transitioning process? How do we leverage the position that we find ourselves, right, to have that big conversation, right, in position ourselves to take advantage of this transitioning? It's not all gloom and doom. There are many things we can do, right? We can say, well, if the transition needs to happen now, then this happen technically, commercially, financially, socioeconomically, those sort of things, right? Or we can look inwards and say, okay, you know what, how long do we have for transitioning? Then we need to take steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And these steps would see us build our internal capacity for all the related industries, whether it's energy, transport, manufacturing, skill gap, technology. What do we need to do as a nation, as a continent, right? We have so many resources. And of course, you also have to ask the question about energy transition in itself. When you talk about renewable sources of energy, right? The process by which you even get some of for instance, we all know that cobalt is a very key element when it comes to renewables, right? It's for key components for some of these batteries and some of these assets that are used. But the process of mining cobalt, it's a very destructive process, right? So the question is, how sustainable exactly is the development of renewable? Have we really measured the cost? Have we counted the cost? If I mine, if I destroy the environment to this extent, and I have renewables for this long, is that better than having a more, normalized disruption over a period of time? As you know, it's catalogued that cobalt, farmers, miners that work in cobalt fields, their children suffer deformities, right? As a result of the exposure to the mines and the equipment they use for the mining, right? So I think there's a big conversation, right? And the reason I mentioned this is those are tools that we can use, that we can present in having these big global recognizable conversations.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
You're taking the policy into the
Yeah.
view.
Yeah.
But my challenge has always been around data.
Yeah.
When I want to put my stories together, I look around figures to really patch my things up, because that's where I know, I'm actually reporting the right thing. As an industry advisor, and you've worked around figures, do you think we're doing enough in terms of trying to work on our figures around the power sectors? Sometimes when you hear conversation, it's always that according to, we're not really getting enough. Even if you want to measure the quantum of the electricity available within the off-grid sectors, we're still not really capturing it in one of us. So what do you think needs to be done around that?
Oh, no, it's very simple. Today we had the event at our Experience Center. This is PWC's Center for Innovation and Development of Leading Technology, right? So the idea here of having it here is to show you how important technology is in today's world. If you don't have data, right, you can't really move forward, because you need to take account of what has happened in the past in developing how you move forward, or your strategy going forward, right? So if you think about it, at what point do we measure data? How accurate is that data that we measure, right? Big data. There's a lot of data being generated from across the value chain, right from the gas supply all the way to customer usage. At what point do we put measuring devices? How do we gather that data? Is it effective? Are there issues of security around it? Are people making that system? Is there a lot of disruption that makes that system ineffective? And how do we deal with all those, right? Of course, like you rightly pointed out, the need to have clean, clear, complete, accurate data, valid data, cannot be underestimated.
Yeah, if you're around finance, we talked about finance. Yeah, it's good. But unfortunately, international investors are not agree with us in terms of development of our gas potentials. We said that gas is a transition for all. They said the funds are available for this, and we are insisting that this is how we will go about it.
Yeah.
What's your advice from an advisory perspective to government and industries? I've always wanted a situation where we can begin to gather our resources together and develop these funds that are not coming from our
No. So that's if I mentioned that in the initial conversation we had, what's our energy policy and strategy going forward, right? And I think this is something that we need to champion. We can't avoid the conversation. I know we've talked about, or we hear sort of funding that the West has made available for Africa to partake in this transitioning, but is it adequate? One of our speakers mentioned earlier the need for us to negotiate, right? We are at a leverage. We are at the point of leverage. We've only done 3% of damage, right? We don't even have the kind of industry that can potentially do that damage, right? So the people who have done the damage are calling the shots. They so happen to be wealthy, and they've been wealthy from the from the optimization of those resources, right? So the question is for us, what do we need to do, right? We're sitting on about potentially about $7 trillion worth of assets that we're about to ditch if we are going to move with this transition. So what does that mean? There's $200 billion, or if my memory serves me right, about that is being talked about. Does that equate to $7 trillion of buried assets, right? How do you, and of course $7 billion is based on research. It's research that is being carried out and is being discussed. So the question is, do you equate potential funding of that amount, of that quantum, to something that potentially could have given that sort of revenues to these countries, and could have been, or even revenues, it could have been input into a significant value creation process, right? So, what's the compensation mechanism? How do we have that conversation in such a way that it's win-win? You know, there's a projection that in the near future, many African countries are going to be net importers of hydrogen, for instance. So the question is, in 2050, if we're going to be net importer of hydrogen, and we're in 2021, then we have how many years? About 29 years to figure things out, right? So what do we need to do to not always be the laggard? We need to be proactive, right? And proactivity means engagement. It means in having those big conversations, those early conversations early, right? Thinking for ourselves, thinking deep, thinking far, thinking wide, you know, and deploying the necessary resources.
Yeah, so the way forward now for investors, because that's what it is. Where do you think an investor can put his money off-grid, fossil?
No, so right now there's a bit of investment in off-grid solutions. Because, I mean, if you think about it, you have a lot of investors. I mean, the truth is, so you have different sorts of off-grid investments. So you have some of the captive solutions, you have some of the proper off-grid solutions that are still fossil fuel based, right? And if you sign a bilateral contract that is beneficial, you do your maths and it works for you, as long as your counterparty can afford it, right? There are other off-grid solutions that are more renewables in nature, right? So you're talking about solar home systems, you're talking about panels, wind solutions, and all this sort of nice, economically friendly, at least at the point of operation, sort of initiatives, right? And with those kind of initiatives, when they're running, the question you have to ask yourself is, the size of those investments are a bit high. The people you're saving are a bit on the lower tier. How do you bridge that, right? So I think that's a very key question that needs to be answered. Once you can answer that, I think then you're in a good place. So right now, there's a lot of subsidy in Nigeria, for instance. The RE is anchoring and supporting a lot of subsidies between the World Bank as well as beneficiaries of these RE schemes, chiefly the solar home systems, which is the one I was mentioning earlier when I mentioned the subsidy moving from about $360 per system to about $600. But I suspect that with time, as technology becomes easier and more common, then some of those subsidies will, and then it becomes more investor friendly.
So finally, because we can continue this conversation for as long as we can, I want to look at the investor side.
Okay.
We've had a lot of discussion around trying to change the orientations, and we need to begin to look at the fact that the reality is coming on us.
Yeah.
Moving into the tariff-based regime, what do you think investors should expect? How do the customers should expect in terms of changing their orientations? Like the whole electricity discourse man talked about bypass, meter bypass. What's your opinion? How do you want to advise Nigerian electricity consumers to really change that perspective?
No, definitely there's change coming. You know, the days of seeing NEPA, I said NEPA, I keep saying NEPA, right? But I mean, the days of seeing electricity, right, as a public good, those days are long gone, right? The day in 2013, where we put private individuals, right, at the helm of affairs of these distribution companies, right? That was the day that sort of thinking stopped. Because if I put in money into a business, I will collect my money back, right? And I'll do everything in my power to do that, right? So, what we tied you as a consumer, for you to be found bypassing or doing something untoward, right? The day I have the opportunity to prosecute you and get you in jail, then you go to jail. So I think the consumer should now have a mindset of, look, there's value, but the value here is apart from the fact that I'm paying for what I'm using, it's something it's an effect that spreads, right? Because I pay for my bill, the investor can employ more people, or pay more the people that works for him more, right? It's a multiplier effect, right? The people that earn more can buy more things, and maybe one of those things that they're buying is something you're transacting, right? So if we think about it from that unselfish, that broader standpoint, and we just stop thinking in our silos of I don't want to pay X amount for electricity, then we see that we're definitely going to be living in an environment where it's better for all of us, right? And we want the electricity sector to grow, right? We talked about so many issues. We talked about energy transitioning, and in this world of today, right, for us to be ready for all those things, we must ensure that our own sector is viable, right? Starting from here, and then, of course, any potential expansion of our grid, as the case may be.
Finally, I think I want to now play around discourse. Don't you think we need sanctions to really get them out?
No, they have sanctions. Oh, they have sanctions.
What do you mean sanctions?
They have sanctions.
A lot of areas are still not really.
Oh, no. So they have sanctions. So the thing about sanctions is it's like, look at your oil and gas sector. There are sanctions for flaring gas. But sometimes you may choose to pay the sanctions, right, as against complying, depending on what your strategy is, right? If you feel like it doesn't just make sense for me as a business to begin to invest in infrastructure that will gather gas, then you go the flaring approach. But that's never been a disincentive for people to flare, right? So the truth is that while discos is more punitive on the discos part, I'm sure that most discos are looking at ways to optimize their network to avoid some of the pressure that are being put on and the magnifying glass that the regulators are putting on them. I think there's a lot of scope. There's a lot of work that a lot of discos. As PWC, we worked with all players in the market, right? So we know we tend to know what people are doing, and I'm sure that and you can do that check yourself. That a lot of people are doing a lot of things, right? Maybe a little too late, but I think there's quite a bit of traction in that space. Yeah.
Welcome back. I know you enjoyed snippets from the PWC Roundtable. Kindly share and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as our social media handles showing on your screen. My name is still Monique Agbe. Thank you for joining us.